because she stands by her testimony. We invited Jimmy Thomas to be our guest tonight, but she declined. With us, though, from Capitol Hill, Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican from Utah and a Clarence Thomas supporter. In Miami, Patricia Arland, who at the time was president of the National Organization for Women. Now, again, during those Thomas confirmation hearings. In New York, our senior legal analyst, Jeffrey Toobin, and CNN senior correspondent, Joe Johns, who has covered these issues, is with us here. Senator Hatch, I want to go to you first. I know you're a Thomas supporter. Many of the people are asking why. They understand this is tough personally for Ginny Thomas and for Clarence Thomas, but why now bring this up? And I want to read you the voicemail that Ginny Thomas left on Anita Hill's voicemail at Brandeis University at 7:31 a.m. on October 9th, a couple weeks ago. Good morning, Anita Hill. It's Ginny Thomas. I just wanted to reach across the airwaves and the years and ask you to consider something. I would love you to consider an apology sometime and some full explanation of why you did what you did with my husband. So give it some thought and certainly pray about this and come to understand why you did what you did. Okay, have a good day. Why now, Senator Hatch? What do you think the motive of that is?
Well, I think Ginny Thomas and Clarence Thomas, they're two of the most honest people I've ever met. They're both really, really good people, very Christian people. They're people who do what they do and say what they say and do it in honor. And I think probably this has grated on Ginny all these years. And I think she probably was hoping that maybe Anita Hill would finally admit that what she said was wrong. And I can tell you a lot about that and why I was so strongly in favor of Clarence Thomas.
And you believe, Senator, to this day, you believe Anita Hill was lying, exaggerating? What do you believe?
The toughest witness to cross-examine is somebody who is absolutely wrong but believes they're right. I think Anita Hill made an excellent witness, but I also know Clarence Thomas and I know Ginny Thomas. By the way, when I heard this whole thing was outed by a staffer of one of the Democrat senators, it was a violation of law to do this because Anita Hill did not want to testify, and that's why she was not called.
I don't want to go back to that, though. I do want to focus on the questions at hand.
No, but let me get to it. This is all important. And what happened was that I called Clarence, and I said, Clarence, is there any truth to this? Now, I know Clarence very well, and I know that if there had been, he would have said, yeah, I did that. But he didn't. He said, no. He said, I can't understand why she would do this. I was her mentor. I helped her. He said, I did promote somebody over her, and he said, it's the only explanation I can give. Well, just think about it. If you put the worst twist, the worst spin on what she accused Clarence Thomas of, you'd have to say he used inappropriate language. Now, he didn't do that.
Let me bring Patricia Arland into the conversation. Do you view it that way, Ms. Arland? I want to read Anita Hill's statement to CNN on this. She said, I certainly thought the call was inappropriate. I have no intention of apologizing because I testified truthfully about my experience, and I stand by that testimony.
Well, I have to say that it is just bizarre that Ms. Thomas would make this call. And like her being a Tea Partier, I think this bizarre behavior is going to reflect in a way that hurts the credibility of Justice Thomas as being an impartial, or should I say fair and balanced member of the Supreme Court. And this close to the elections, I wonder if it might help remind some voters why it's so important who we elect to the U.S. Senate to vote on things like nominations to the court and elsewhere. I think that it is inexplicable, and it doesn't surprise me at all that Professor Hill thought it was somebody's bad joke and referred it to security.
I want to bring Jeff Toobin into the conversation first, but I do want to say, Ms. Allen, you just said it's bizarre, like her involvement with the Tea Party. Most people involved in the Tea Party, whether you agree or disagree with their politics, are Americans who are exercising their First Amendment rights. I do think is it a question of whether the spouse of a Supreme Court justice should be involved in overt political activity. That's a debate we can have. But just joining the Tea Party, for any American, again, whatever you think of their views, they have every right to do that. They're exercising their rights. I'm not defending them.
No,
I'm just saying that's not bizarre.
Joining, excuse me, but you misquoted me, because what I said was, like her being a Tea Partier, this will hurt Justice Thomas's credibility.
Okay, if that's your point, I apologize. Jeff, come in on that point. Senator, I'll get back to you in just one sec. Jeff, come in on that point because it is unusual. Now, look, she's married to a prominent person. Hillary Clinton was married to a prominent person. He was the President of the United States. Michelle Obama is married to a prominent person, the President of the United States. Political spouses have this difficulty if they're accomplished professionals, if they are involved somehow. And Ginny Thomas, long before she married Clarence Thomas, was involved in politics. Where is the line?
Well, I don't think Ginny Thomas has crossed the line here at all. She was a political activist, as you point out, before she even met Clarence Thomas. But they are a team. They believe the same things, they fight for the same things in different forms, but Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas are both committed to a conservative agenda, and they are acting on it every day in their respective jobs. That's what they do. It's not illegal, but it is also what they do.
Yeah, and Joe, committed this. I want also to read a statement that Tony Perkins of the Conservative Family Research Council, who I should note, in about an hour, will be hosting a web seminar with Ginny Thomas to talk about spending and government issues and the elections this year. I don't suspect they're going to talk much about this. He gave us this statement. Isn't this what the feminist movement was all about? Feminists hold up Jill Biden, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Hillary Clinton as spouses who paved the way for other women. Even though Ginny Thomas is a conservative, she still has the same constitutional rights to engage in the political process. I don't think anyone disputes that. The question is, she's involved in a group right now, Liberty Central. It's a 501c, which is complicated for a lot of people, but it's one of these organizations that raises money, has tax-exempt status, and is spending it on political activities. And some ask the question, wait a minute, aren't those very issues going to come before the court? And should Justice Thomas maybe have to recuse himself?
Yeah, that's a relevant question, and it's the kind of thing that's sort of an offshoot of all of this. But the nucleus of this whole thing is a little bit of anger and an unresolved issue. Clarence Thomas really, to this day, is still viewed through the prism of those confirmation hearings that were so controversial. And he is reviled on the left and revered on the right. So these are things that have just never been resolved. As far as the 501 and the corollary issues, there's a much broader picture out there that will involve a lot more than just Justice Thomas.
I want to get back to Pat Ireland first and then Senator Hatch, just as an impression. When I read this, when it was breaking last night, I read it, and your mind starts thinking, why is this coming up now? What is the motivation of this? And we're not involved. This is somebody's life, and it's somebody's marriage. But just what went through your mind when you heard this?
Well, I did think it was awkward, to say the least. I was reminded, of course, of the huge outpouring of women telling their own stories of sexual harassment at the time of those confirmation hearings. And whether you believed Anita Hill or didn't, it was a cultural watershed with women, many of them like Anita Hill, who were reluctant to tell their stories, suddenly felt free to tell their stories, and I think it helped change the culture against sexual harassment. And again, no matter what you think of the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill confrontation, I think it was significant, and that's what came through my mind.
Senator Hatch, a final thought for you, and as you give it, could you weigh in on the question of does she has every right as a citizen to have political activity, but is there a line sometimes where it puts the justice in a tough spot, maybe, of having to consider recusal?
Well, both of them know what the line is, and Clarence Thomas is very careful about meeting strict judicial standards. He's a totally honest man. I haven't met anybody I'd rate any higher than Clarence Thomas. When I called him and said, did you do this? He said, no, sir. And I knew that if he had, he would have said, well, yeah, I said those things. But then again, you look at what happened in the past. My gosh, Clarence Thomas, like you say, if you put the worst spin on it, you'd have to say it was inappropriate language. It wasn't true, the accusation against him, but look at what's happened in this town since. And I've got to say, I wish our friends on the feminist side and on the Democrat side would find as much fault with those who've gone way beyond any accusation that was made to Clarence Thomas, but yet find so much fault with Ginny Thomas because she's a conservative. And to bring up the Tea Party, that's only done to smear her. I'm convinced of that. Look, I was there. I know this more intimately than almost anybody. And I can tell you Clarence Thomas was telling the truth. I believe that Anita Hill was an excellent witness. I think she actually believed and talked herself into believing what she said. There was a sexual harasser at that time, according to the sources I had. And he was her supervisor. He just wasn't Clarence Thomas. And I think she transposed that to where she believed it because she was outed by the feminist women at that time, and she couldn't change her mind after she couldn't change her tune. And that's what happened. Now, I wish her well. I hope that she does a good job up there at Brandeis, and it's just the way it is. But don't smear Clarence Thomas, and above all, don't smear his wife, Jenny. She's a really good person.
All right, Senator Hatch, appreciate your time. I don't want to